I have the honor today of introducing to you one of my sons. And this sermon he's mentioned to me several times. I told him a while back, I said, when you've got something ready, let me know. He said, I got something percolating. Well, it's percolated long enough. Ladies and gentlemen, Jock Evans.
I'm going to talk to you today about the resurrection of Lazarus. I started this off with a different tone, but as I began to study the story of Lazarus and I began to realize how significant it was, my attitude changed a little bit. And we're going to have a little fun. We're going to run a rabbit around a couple of different directions today and have a little fun. If you don't think it's okay to have fun in church, then you probably came to the wrong place today, because I'm going to have a little fun. And I'm going to have fun whatever I'm doing. So if you don't want to have fun, don't do anything with me, because you're going to have fun too, whether you like it or not. Okay? I'm going to read you something to start off. Let's start off with a story, a quick story. After a real hard rain down in Seneca, Missouri, all the potholes and the chug holes in the road were filled with water. And two young brothers were out playing in the street, in the chug holes, and the mother was watching out the window. All of a sudden, the older of the two boys, about 6 years old, grabs the younger brother by the scruff of his neck and starts dunking his face down in the potholes. Well, he lets him up, and the little boy's rubbing his face, wiping the water off his face. The mother runs out screaming, "What are you doing? What in the world do you think you're doing? Dunking your little brother in the pothole." He said, "Well, Mama, I'm just playing church. I'm baptizing him in the name of the Father, the Son, and in the hole he goes." Wait, it'll set in a minute. All right. Let me read you an introduction. The account of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead stirs our emotions and causes us to stand in awe of God's power. Maybe this passage is so powerful to us because we can visualize it so clearly in our minds. We can see ourselves trudging down the streets of Bethany with Christ and his disciples. As we near the outskirts of town, we can hear the sounds of sobbing and wailing. Then from the direction of Lazarus' house, Martha comes running to Jesus, tears streaming down her face, and we can feel her pain and hopelessness as she cries out her frustration to the Lord. "If only you had been here, my brother had not died." On the faces of the mourners standing around, we can see the same look of frustration and hopelessness. If only he had gotten here sooner. If only Lazarus could have held on a few more days. I am sure Jesus could have healed him. If only Jesus wasn't late. Now that is the opening and intro to a daily devotion I was reading some time back. And it hung with me. It got me interested in this story of the resurrection of Lazarus, so I began to study it more. But the problem was, the more I studied it, the deeper and more significant it got. See, even from a child, we're taught the story of it. Have you ever preached on Lazarus' resurrection? That I recall? You've preached on everything. I just don't recall it. That's not very good, is it? But at any rate, the more I studied it, the more I realized that the story of Lazarus' resurrection was much more than just Jesus coming to the home of a friend that he loved who had died and raising him from the dead. It's deeper than that. Let me give a little let me make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Let me give a little background on what's going on here. The resurrection of Lazarus is I believe, the sixth miracle that's recorded in the book of John that Jesus performed. Let me give you some background on what's going on here. Jesus had been traveling around the area, town to town. He was performing miracles, and signs and wonders were following him, and the religious folk of the day were becoming more and more and more agitated and threatened. And this was the last of the miracles that Jesus performed. This was the beginning of probably the greatest, the most famous manhunt in history. I was going to give you just an overview, and then I wanted to go into some fun stuff, kind of off the wall, but I don't believe I can. I'm going to give the overview, but then I think we're going to have a short Bible study on this as well before we get into the funner stuff. Let me tell you what's going on here. Lazarus is sick. His sisters, Mary and Martha, send for Jesus to heal him. Jesus loves them, but there's a greater plan. I want to emphasize this greater plan. I'll get there in a minute. To use Lazarus' situation for God's glory. So Jesus hangs out a couple more days. He tells his disciples they're going back to Judea, the same place where everyone was trying to kill him just a few days before. Jesus rolls in 4 days after Lazarus has died and is told by Lazarus' sisters that he should have been there sooner. But Jesus puts his Father's plan into action and raises Lazarus from the dead for the glory of God, and so that the Son of God would be glorified in it, and the faith of the disciples would be strengthened through it. That was the overview I was going to give. But the more I got into the story, I realized we can't do that. I really want to get into a couple of attitudes that are displayed in the story, but first we're going to go through a short Bible study, so why don't we just begin at the beginning? Is that a good place to start? Please, y'all got to talk to me, because it gets lonely up here if you're not talking. Let's go to John chapter 11, verse 1. If you've got your book, I wish you'd turn in it with me. Let me wet my whistle here. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. Let me preface this with something. Stop reading just for a second. This greater plan did not ever at one point involve Jesus healing Lazarus. That wasn't in the plan. The plan was Lazarus had to die. And I believe I'm going to prove it in just a minute. Stay with me. I know that's maybe you all know all this stuff, but this was new to me. So stay with me. Mary and his sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Okay? You've got to move quick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. Now that's key. He whom you love is sick. He's talking about Lazarus. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that, he was sick. Wait a minute, let me read that again. I didn't need to pause right there. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. What? Is that a typographical error? Those two, 5 and 6, don't even go together. It doesn't make any sense. Read that again. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Does that sound like he had any intention of healing Lazarus? No? Matt, if I found out you were sick and I had the power to heal you, and I just said, I'm just going to stay here a couple more days and let Matt go ahead and die. Does that sound like I love you and have best intentions for you? No, not really. Doesn't sound like it. It's what it says, but it doesn't sound like it. Let's go on to verse 7. Now, look, if you're taking notes in the margin of your Bible, when this is verses 5 and 6, that's the first piece of the puzzle. There's 3 pieces of this puzzle that I believe I can prove that Jesus, part of God's greater plan, had to let Lazarus die. The plan wasn't to heal him. The plan was to resurrect him. Keep going. Then after these couple of days, he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said, are you nuts? We just left there. We just escaped by the skin of our teeth. They were trying to capture you and stone you. You want to go back? And then Jesus gave them a big philosophical answer, and it confused them. It went right over their heads, so I'm just going to skip it. Then these things, verse 11, he said, after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him. The disciples thought he was talking about taking a nap, so they said, well, if he's sleeping, he'll get better. They thought he was speaking of just sleep, but Jesus was speaking of death. Jesus finally, he has to get frustrated with these guys, I know, at some point. Jesus finally just looks at them and says, Lazarus is dead. Okay? It's right here. Lazarus is dead, verse 14. And I am glad for your sake that I was not there. Now listen, I was glad for your sake that I was not there, that you may believe. Okay, that's the second piece of this puzzle in this Bible study. I'm going to read it again. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, because he could have healed him, that you may believe. And nevertheless, let us go to see him. Then Thomas, who's called the twin, verse 16, said, let us also go that we may die with him. That not talking about Lazarus, talking about Jesus. They expect Jesus to die when he goes back to Judea, because they were trying to kill him. Verse 17, I found this interesting. This is just a side note. I named this sermon, Current Affliction. And I found out when I got to verse 17 that Bethany, the town that he's from, actually means house of affliction. I thought that was a little funny, ironic. Okay, now there's a third piece of this puzzle that will come into view a little bit later. But right now, I've kind of somewhat established that the greater plan that was referenced is Lazarus has to die. So stay with me now. I'm going somewhere. But what I really want to deal with, I'm skipping. This is part 2. I'm making a quantum leap here. So just leave the Bible study there for just a minute, okay? We'll get back to that. What I wanted to deal with was some attitudes, namely that of Mary and Martha, or rather their lack of faith. If you look at verse 21, now Jesus is on his way back. Martha finds out and she runs out to meet him and she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Verse 32, Mary comes running out, meets Jesus, says the exact same thing. I want you to notice what both of them say. They first start off with this. They said, Lord. They acknowledged him as their Lord right off the bat, both of them, but they both made the same statement. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, I want you to understand something. This family had an intimate relationship with Jesus. He came to their home. Mary washed Jesus' feet with her hair. They traveled with him. They observed the signs and the wonders that followed him. They watched him perform miracle after miracle. But when there was a crisis, they even had the knowledge that Jesus could speak from afar and heal without even being present. And I'll show you that real quick if you'll turn back to chapter 4. Start at verse 46. Remember, Jesus had been performing miracles all over the area. So here, this is just another example. So Jesus came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine, and there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and implored him to come down to heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Now, let's get to the next verse, verse 48. Are we there? Okay, mine's the New King James, so it reads a little different. This struck me as funny. Then Jesus said to him, unless you people, he called him a you people. He pulled the you people card out on him. Jesus said, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe. The nobleman said to him, sir, come down before my child dies. Jesus said, go to him, go your way, your son lives. And then the nobleman with his servants later on, as he was headed home, confirmed that at the exact hour of the day that Jesus said, your son lives, is when his son was healed from a distance. So Mary and Martha, they had confirmation that Jesus could just speak the word and Lazarus would have been healed. There's another piece of the puzzle. Jesus could have just spoke from the town that he was at and healed Lazarus, and he didn't do it. Okay? So they knew all this. They had experienced all of this, but yet in the midst of their crisis in their own home, they had no faith. Why? I'll explain. The world got in the way. Think about that for a second. If you're taking notes, I'm going to give you a statement I want you to carry with you. Write it down and carry with you, because it'll help you, strengthen you in time of crisis. The world says you have to see to believe. But the Word says you have to believe to see. See, the world runs contrary to the Word. It does. Everybody else can be going this way. And so you naturally think, I should just be going this way. It looks easy. All the briars are trampled down, all the rough spots are knocked over, all the grass is rolling down. That's an easy path. Just follow the crowd. But no, the Word says you need to go this way on the narrow path. You need to go that way. Slap somebody and say, what does he mean? Now, Sue, don't be slapping these people. Okay, let me give you another example. How many young people we got in here today? Put your hand down. Let me give another example. I had occasion to go to the mall one weekend night, to pick up a gift. That's a scary place on weekends at night. Young people, the world and friends and schoolmates, they'll invite you. Why don't we come with us? Let's go to the mall where the drugs are. Don't go behind that mall on weekends at night. Don't do it. It's not a good place. Let's go to the mall. Let's go where all the drugs and the smoking and all the foul language and all that stuff is. That's what the world says to do. But no, the Word says to go to Epic and get fed the Word, the spiritual nourishment that you need to solidify you in a time of crisis. The world runs contrary to the Word. Far too often, Christians who normally operate in great faith in someone else's crisis. Now listen, I'm referencing back Mary and Martha. In someone else's crisis can become distracted by the world. Can we put that up there, Haley? That one slide I asked you to put. Yeah, that's it. I'm going to get to that in a second. Christians who normally operate in great faith in someone else's crisis become distracted by the world when they're forced to deal with a crisis in their own life. And they forget what the Word says about that situation. You see, when they're fighting a battle alongside another believer who's been weakened by the battle, by the fight, it's easy for us, for someone, a Christian, a believer, to exhibit great action on behalf of the other believer. To enact action is easy when you're doing that for someone else. And you're on the mountaintop. And everything's going good. It's easy to do that because your belief is solid. It's strong. And your confidence is unshakable. That, whether you know it or not, is the very definition of faith. That's the ABCs of faith from a message that Dad preached a while back. Faith is an action based upon a belief sustained by a confidence. And it's easy to exhibit that when we're fighting alongside somebody else in their battle when we don't have a battle going on in our life. But wait till the enemy shows up at your door and the battle's in your backyard. It's easy to become frozen at that moment. Where's all that action and belief and confidence? When the devil's trying to tear your back door down. When it's your child that's sick. You'll be frozen into inaction because your belief's been shaken. Our confidence has been canceled with doubt. Whew, that is a pretty good word. See, the world has gotten in the way of the Word. It runs contrary to the Word. You know, I almost titled this sermon, Get the L Out. I did. My original title was Get the L Out. I didn't put that up there because I thought it might be too much for the sign outside. Well, there's a reason for that. It was just L, not the whole word, just L. Get the L out. You see, what we need to start doing, the world has gotten in the way of the Word. What we need to do is we need to get the L out of the world. Turning the world into Word so that we start focusing not on what the world says about our current situation, but what God's Word says about our current situation. And operate from there. Somebody ought to say amen right there. I believe the plan from the very beginning was that Jesus had to tarry in town until Lazarus died so that he could go and raise him from the dead. And I'm going to show you the final piece of the puzzle here in a minute. We're going to start in verse 34. And Jesus said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." And 35, Jesus wept. I was going to get into Jesus wept because I believe I can explain why, but I can't prove it. So I'm not going to get into that. I don't have time. His grave was a cave, and it had a stone laid in front of it. And verse 39, Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha said, "Hey, he's been dead 4 days. This time he stinks." And this is I almost have to get into Jesus wept a little bit. Jesus didn't weep because Lazarus was dead. Not at all. He knew he was about to raise him up. He didn't weep because of that. There's other reasons that I believe that he wept at that moment. Part of it was his compassion, but it wasn't because Lazarus was dead. Make no mistake about that. Back when Jesus was first met with Martha out on the road, he told Martha, "Hey, your brother will rise again." He said it straight up front. I'm going to raise him up. Jesus knew he was going to raise Lazarus up. He wasn't weeping. He didn't weep because of Lazarus was dead. He wept for another reason, but I'm not going to go into it. But he tells her here, "Did I not say to you that if you would be," verse 40, I'm sorry. Yeah. "Did I not say to you that if you would believe that you would see the glory of God?" And they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was laying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and he said. Now, make sure these verses are on the screen for those that were too lazy to bring their Bibles today. Oops, was that out loud? Okay, here's the final piece of the puzzle. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me." Now listen. "But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." The greater picture was the resurrection of Lazarus, so that more people would believe and begin to follow him as the Son of God and the Messiah. There was a greater picture to this story. I think that's pretty powerful, personally. You know, you're scholars, you already knew all this stuff. So if you've heard all this, just pretend like you haven't heard it, and it's the best sermon you've heard in a week. Now, Jesus, after he got done with that, when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth!" And he did, and he was bound head and foot with grave clothes. His face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them around, "Loose him, set him free, let him go." Now, I've heard Dad say this before, but it is interesting that he had to specify Lazarus when he cried with a loud voice. If he had just cried out, "Come forth," that tomb would have been busting with a whole horde of dead people coming out of there, been raised from the dead. But here, this is the way my crazy brain works. I'm going to have to hurry, guys. I'm sorry. This is the way my crazy brain works. Lazarus wasn't the only one in the afterworld. See, put yourself in the story. What if you're sitting around there with Lazarus and Abraham and David and Ruth and Samson, all these guys? They're sitting around and playing some pinochle or something. Is that what you guys play? No, dominoes. But they're playing dominoes. So they're playing dominoes, and all of a sudden they hear a voice, Jesus' voice, speak out into the afterworld and say, "Lazarus, come forth." Now, if I was David, I'd have probably said, "Hey, Jesus, descendant of mine, I'm still here. What's the deal?" Anyway, that's just my little side note. Lazarus did come forth, shuffling, grave clothes. You know, this was the image of the first mummy. This is where the story of the mummy came from, right? All bound up and shuffling along, can't talk. Don't get me started now. All right, I'm going to tell you a story about Jocelyn. I've seen this several times in my life, but Jocelyn was just the last one that I've seen this happen to. Where we live, we've got wooden handrails on the balconies and the steps and all that. And Jocelyn has a habit. She likes to go barefooted. She has a bad habit that she'll scuff her feet on that wood, and she runs her hands down the handrail like this. And Jessica's told her several times, don't do that. It's going to get you. Well, the other day we were outside. I think we were getting ready to leave, and she's got her hand going down the handrail like this. Treated wood, the splinter from treated wood is 10 times worse than a regular splinter. She's sliding her hand down the handrail and goes, ow! It's splinter! I got a splinter! And Kyler leans over and he said, here, well, let me get it. No, it hurts! It hurts! No, don't touch it! Well, let me get it out. I know it hurts. Let me get it out. No, don't touch it. It hurts. It hurts. Don't touch it. Okay, now I'm going to go into something else. Just let that story sit there a minute. How many times? Anybody else ever done that? You know what that's like? No, don't touch it. It hurts. Just leave it where it's at. Good. Are you okay? He's made me spill water on myself. Got a splinter. Okay, I'm going to take a little liberty here. Just forget about that. I'm going to take a little liberty here. Picture this. Let's run a rabbit around a little bit. What if Lazarus had said no? I know my brain works different than everybody else's, but what if after Jesus called with a loud voice, there was nothing but silence? Disciples be back here like this. What's going on? I don't know. Nothing. And finally, a voice calls out of the tomb. It's Lazarus. No, I'm good. I'm good right here, Jesus. I'm comfortable. Been hanging out with David the harpist. I need the singers to probably come up here. I've been hanging out with David the harpist. Musicians, please, go take your positions. I've been jamming out, playing some music with David and boys. You know I was a musician and a singer, right, Jesus? Yeah. See, I play tambourine with a silver jingle, and I'm sure I know the words to at least 1,000,000 tunes. But the one most requested by the warrior known as David is an eternal celebration of the King that's coming soon. I play tambourine with a silver jingle, and I'm sure I know the words to at least 1,000,000 tunes. But the one most requested by the warrior known as David is an eternal celebration of the King that's coming soon. Now, I don't need you to play. I just need you to look pretty. So I'll just stay right here. Lazarus said, I'll just stay right here where I'm comfortable. See, this is familiar. This is familiar. I know what's going on here. I'm familiar. I'm comfortable in my current affliction, Jesus. I don't need to be freed from my bondage. I don't want to. It might hurt. Don't touch it. I'm good right here. I'm good. I don't need you to deliver me from my bondage. Is that not ridiculous? To think that Lazarus would say no to being freed from his bondage? That would be crazy. Nobody would deny Jesus' call to free them from their bondage, right? Well, then how come you do it? How come you do it? swallowing that? How come you do it? Oh no, I would never refuse, deny the call of Jesus who's going to free me from my bondage. Well, look, what is your bondage? Let's figure that out. Are you bound to fear? Fear of relationships? You walk in fear? You walk around defeated? And Jesus is calling you out. He has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. He's calling you out. Come forth. Is that you? Oh, I would never deny Jesus' call. Well, what's your bondage? Bitterness? Anger? Gossip? Well, look at Ephesians 4:31. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger, clamor, and evil speaking out of your mouth be put away from you. He's calling you out of your bondage. Come forth. That gossip one, I know, that's a big one. What about condemnation? What about that event, that sin? What about that one great thing that haunts you to this day? What about that series of behaviors? What about that decade? I got that one. What about that decade that the devil throws up in your face and the condemnation washes over you and it takes you a week to get it shaken off of there? Am I preaching to anybody? Right? Somebody better say something to me or I'm going to go home. There is now, therefore, no more condemnation for sin. He's calling you out. It's easy. It's easy to become comfortable in our current affliction, our current bondage. You know, you carry around something long enough, you begin to protect it. Don't touch it. It hurts. Don't touch it. Let me help you get it. Let me help you get that out of there. No, don't touch it. It hurts. I'm comfortable in my current affliction. Don't touch it. We begin to build scar tissue around it to shield it and protect it. When all Jesus wants to do is free you from your bondage. Amen. But we protect it. We carry it around. You know, if you have an injury in your body, you begin to adjust. If you got an injured foot or a leg or a knee, you begin to adjust everything to favor it and take care of that. Be easy on it. Don't touch it. It hurts. Don't touch it. You know what? But you know what? Favor in that one part of the body affects the movement and the function of all the rest of the body. This is a better word than you're giving me. Oh, don't touch it. It hurts. I want to keep it. And if we're not careful, we'll begin to allow this current affliction, this bondage, to not only affect our lives, but identify who we are in life. Maybe you're an addict. Were you an addict? Are you an addict? Does that define you? Well, I was an addict, so therefore I'm always going to be an addict. I might justify my behavior because I'm an addict, so I'm going to go out and do addict stuff. I was promiscuous, so that's my justification from going out and sleeping around with all these people. I'm promiscuous. It identifies who I am now, right? Jesus just wants to free you, loose you from your bondage. Let's go ahead and play that song softly, please. So I'm going to call out to you today. Come forth. Close your eyes, please. Bow your heads.